Olá, quero dar as boas-vindas a todo mundo que está nos assistindo. Meu nome é Bia, eu sou editora na Vestígio e eu quero convidar vocês para conversar um pouco sobre este livro aqui, ó, Terapia Zen. Há muitos anos, o psicoterapeuta Mark Epstein estuda a influência do pensamento budista na linguagem da psicologia ocidental. Nesse livro, ele se dedica a escrever em detalhes sobre as sessões de terapia em que esses conceitos budistas beneficiaram e muito os seus pacientes. Hoje, a gente tem a honra de contar com a presença do autor aqui para aprofundar essa conversa, mas antes, eu quero apresentar um leitor muito especial desse livro que vai conduzir esse bate-papo para a gente. Ele é jornalista, escritor, apresentador da Rádio CBN em São Paulo, onde ele é crítico literário no Clube do Livro e âncora no programa Fim de Expediente. É uma alegria receber aqui José Godoy. Seja bem-vindo, Zé.
Oi, Bia, boa noite. Acho que vai ser um papo bem legal. Já pode mudar a chavinha para o inglês ou eu falo mais uma coisa em português já?
Eu vou só apresentar o Mark para os nossos leitores e daí a gente já começa.
Ok.
Então, antes da gente chamar o nosso autor, eu só queria esclarecer que o vídeo vai estar sendo gravado hoje, né, no dia 10 de agosto, e a nossa conversa vai ser em inglês, mas quando subir para o YouTube já vai estar com legenda. Então, agora a gente vai chamar o nosso autor. He's a psychiatrist and the author of a number of books about the interface of Buddhism and psychotherapy. Terapia Zen is his most recent book, which was just published by Vestígio a couple of months ago. So welcome, Mark. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll be giving the floor to Zé so you can chat a bit about the book and psychotherapy and Zen Buddhism and everything in between. Over to you, Zé.
Hi, Mark. It's a great pleasure for me to talk to you today. I've been reading your book for a long time, so it's really nice for me to have you today. I'd like to. It's funny for me talk to you this way, because usually when I talk to a therapist, I lie back on a couch. Let's see what I can do today, sitting in front of you.
Yeah, we don't do the couch so much anymore. Now we mostly sit face to face in New York.
Yes. I think we can start maybe talking about this idea of Zen aspect of therapy. What's the difference of this approach?
What's the difference between the Zen approach and the conventional psychotherapy approach?
Yes.
I'm not sure there's really any difference. I think whatever difference there is probably lies in the wisdom and compassion of the therapist, in the understanding of the therapist. I would say maybe one difference is, Freud used to say that the best he could do was to bring someone from a state of neurotic misery into one of common unhappiness. And the Buddha says, there's something we can do about common unhappiness, that maybe it's possible to turn that unhappiness into some kind of wisdom, some kind of compassion. Not that we can necessarily eliminate it, but that it doesn't have to be the last word on our experience. So I think there's something in the Buddhist approach that has helped me as a therapist go into a treatment with a patient with an understanding that their intelligence, their wisdom, that their awakened mind is somehow already present within them, and my job is to help them find it.
Okay. You quote in the book some people that work in your life as a kind of Buddhist teachers. Can you talk about them, like Joseph Goldstein, Jack Cornfield, Randaz? What's the importance of these guys in your life?
Well, I was 20 years old when I met all three of those people who you mentioned: Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, and Ram Dass. I was a student in college. I didn't know very much about anything. I had some kind of vague idea that maybe therapy, maybe I would be a therapist, because it seemed like maybe that was work that wasn't really work, sitting and talking with people. I liked people, I thought, but I didn't know anything. I had a little bit of therapy because I was a kind of anxious person, but the therapy hadn't really helped me that much yet. And I went out to a Buddhist summer camp. It was 1974, and Joseph Goldstein was teaching a class, Jack Kornfield was teaching a class, Ram Dass was teaching a class, and I went to all of their teachings, and they were beginning to talk about mindfulness, about meditation, about Buddhism, about suffering, about compassion. And my ears were like I've been waiting for this for my whole life, and so I just began to absorb what they were talking about. They were Jack and Joseph were each about 10 years older than I was, which meant they were about 30 years old. Ram Dass was 20 years older or so, which meant he was about 40 years old. They seemed like grown-ups to me, like so old and wise. And I became a student of theirs and started to sit to meditate with them, silent meditation retreats for 1 week, for 10 days, for 2 weeks. And the power, the power of the meditation started to reveal itself to me. And I realized, oh, this is a real thing, and I can do it. So I learned all that before going to medical school, before becoming a psychiatrist. So that was kind of in me from the beginning of my career.
It's interesting because in the United States, it's a very important field. Buddhism is a very important field in universities. You have a lot of good translations to ocidental people. Here in Brazil, I'm a Zen Buddhist. I was born in São Paulo. Now I live in Rio. But São Paulo, it's a very big community, Japanese community. You have a big temple of Zen temple in São Paulo, very important. But we don't have here in Brazil good translations, Ocidental translations, Brazilian translations of this tradition. It's very interesting, like these guys, Cornfield, Goldstein, how the work they did to enlighten the Occidental mind about the Buddhism. Not.
Yeah, they were sort of like the second generation to do that. In these years that I'm talking about, there were no good translations here either. There had been some German monks who had gone to India and to Sri Lanka and had written both in German and in English. And in the big university library where I was studying, some of those translations were available. But really, there was very little in those years. That's why meeting these actual people, they had been, each of them had been in Asia for, 7 years or so previously. So meeting them and hearing their excuse me. I'm not used to talking this much. Meeting them and hearing their personal experiences was so powerful for me, more powerful than reading the books. Later, I came to read the books, and then I even started writing books, But to actually hear their personal experience was very meaningful for me.
Mark, I'd like to discuss with you some aspects of that are very important in the therapy process. I think you bring a lot of great insights to approach them. I'd like to start with the idea of inner violence. can you explain that for us? The idea that the inner peace is only possible when one is at peace at one's one mind. How can you explain this for us?
Well, I was always sort of suspicious of the idea of inner peace. It seemed very appealing, but kind of out of reach. And I thought, oh, people are like selling happiness, they're selling inner peace. What does it really mean? But the more I contemplated that notion, I started to realize that what the Buddhist teachers were really talking about with inner peace was about calming the internal violence of one's own mind.
Mm-hmm.
So not just anger at our parents or at our lovers, at our children, at people who have wronged us. Not just, it includes that, but not just that, but also the way we are violent towards ourselves, the way we criticize ourselves, the way we're ashamed of ourselves, the whole inner relationship that we have with the self that we take to be so real and that we often feel is so wrong. You know, that bringing that kind of silent battle into awareness, you know, with the idea that it could be calmed, that started to make sense to me. So that inner peace, instead of being like a state of floating, you know, like transcendental meditation where we can like float off the cushion and or be like kind of a drugged state of our mind. No, inner peace means that we are actually finally at peace with ourselves rather than constantly criticizing.
For people, I think everybody heard about attachment when listen about Buddhism. To Buddha, attachment is the main cause of suffering. How do you help your patients to deal with this aspect of the mind?
Well, it depends what you mean. It depends what you mean by attachment. I think people often misunderstand that thought, you know, because attachment is very important from a psychological stance. You know, the way a baby is attached to his or her mother or father. That if we don't have attachment, then we become a mess. You know, sometimes I think better words to use to describe attachment is it's more like clinging. You know, it's more like craving. It's more like trying to extract something extra from life, you know, that never being satisfied, trying to control those aspects of life that we cannot control, you know, like aging and death and separation and loss, illness, and so on. There's a kind of expectation, maybe we could say, expectations rather than attachments might be the cause of a lot of our disquiet, of a lot of our suffering from a Buddhist point of view. So the idea is that if you can make those expectations conscious, you know, instead of being manipulated by them from the inside, that you can start to see for yourself the folly of that way of being, you know, that there's a more gracious kind of way of handling yourself in this world that's full of uncertainty. You know, there's a simpler way of navigating oneself than trying to over control everything. I think that's more what I've gotten from the Buddhist way of thinking.
In my experience with psychotherapy, sometimes I know that I understand in my mind the meaning of my suffering.
Yeah.
but it's very difficult to understand in the emotionally this suffering. You say you write about the John Cage, the openness to emotions, the emotions like sounds. You say you write that you wrote that in the book.
Yeah.
What's the way to transform or difficult to connect to our own emotions? Because I don't know if it's a problem of ocidental mind, of the all kind of mind.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to understand rational the situations, but not emotions. How can you explain this for us?
Well, from the Buddhist point of view, the major cause of our suffering is either attachment, clinging, or aversion, anger. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so many of us are afraid of our own emotional selves. When we feel something, we don't just allow ourselves to feel it. We attach either a clinging to it, or we hold on to it, like this really matters, this is really important, or we push it away. Like, I'm not allowed to feel this kind of anger, or this desire, or this jealousy, or this envy, or whatever. So the therapy, both from the Western side and from the Buddhist side, is actually to leave the emotions alone, like experience them purely and simply for what they are. That's the connection to John Cage and sound. John Cage was a composer who decided he was going to try to find the music in even non-musical sounds. He wasn't going to pick out the musical sounds. He was going to let everything, the sound of the cars, the sound of the crickets, the coughing, the random noise, would all be part of his symphony. So my idea, linking John Cage to Buddhism and to psychotherapy, is that we can do the same with our emotional lives. That the more simply we can allow the entire range of our emotional selves, that's how we get to know ourselves. That's how we find a sense of wholeness or completeness or acceptance, and ultimately kindness or compassion towards oneself, because we're all human beings, which means we are all capable of the entire range of human emotion, and we have to understand that and learn how to work with that.
Mm-hmm. You have a lot of case studies in the book, therapy sessions of some of your patients. It's very interesting the way you do this. How do you start to write about the sessions? You saw that you could have a book there.
Yeah. Well, maybe I could explain a little bit about the book and how I structured it. I didn't know that I was going to be writing this book when I started writing it. I've written all of my books just one day a week. The other 4 days a week I see patients, but I always kept one day for writing. And I had finished my previous book, but I still had my day of writing in front of me, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to write the same book. I've written a lot of books. I didn't want to write another version of the same book all over again. So I decided, people are always asking me, like the way you did to begin the interview, what makes a Buddhist therapy? Like, what do you do that's different? Do you teach your patients to meditate? Do you meditate with them? Do you, what's so special? And my usual response is, like I sort of did with you, is I don't know if it is special. I just know what I'm doing. So I decided, okay, why don't I try? I've always been sort of resistant to using my patients as material for my books. I've done it, but But over the years, I've mostly used my own experience as the primary case study. You know, this is what it was like for me in therapy. This is what it was like for me when I'm meditating. But I decided now, a couple of years ago, when I started this book, okay, why don't you just try to write down as clearly and concisely as possible one psychotherapy session, you know, just how it happened, one during the week. And so I set myself that task, and I picked out one session, like sort of in the middle of the hour. I would think to myself, yeah, this is a good one. Maybe there's something of the Buddhist, my Buddhist influence that's coming through just in the way that the conversation is going. So at the end of that 1 hour, I would scribble down notes about what happened during the session. And then during my writing day, I would sit in my office and write it up as cleanly as I could, not adding any, just trying to describe the back and forth of the session, you know. And I did that for a year without knowing that it would be part of a book, just as a sort of exercise. And after a year, I was like, okay, that's enough of that. You know, I had like 50 sessions. And I gathered them all together. And I have a very good editor who's helped me with my last couple of books. And I sent the collection of sessions to her. And I said, do you think there's anything here that might be interesting for a book? Because I explained, I'm trying to demonstrate the Buddhist influence on my work without saying it's specifically Buddhist. You know, I want to show how it's coming through, if it's coming through. And she said, well, you know, you're not following any one patient all the way through. So it's sort of interesting. It's like a mosaic of therapy, but the only real through line is you know. So I think what you have to do is go through each, if you want to, is go through each of the cases and write a little more about what was happening inside of you during the session, you know. So give some commentary, give some reflection on each of the sessions. And I thought, that hadn't occurred to me. But I thought I could do that. I could try that. So during the next year, during my writing time, that's what I did. I worked on the reflections. And that happened to coincide with the onset of COVID. So the face-to-face sessions that I had documented were in 2019, you know, like right up the edge of COVID. So all of a sudden I had this record of face-to-face psychotherapy sessions, and I couldn't do them anymore. Now I was just doing everything on Zoom. And I had more writing time than I was used to. So I really enjoyed this process of reflection about the sessions. And that's where the Zen idea started to come in, because each session, they were so small. And if you read the book, you'll see, you know, like the material that's talked about in any given session, it's just like, oh, I had a fight with my boyfriend, or, you know, my mother came to visit and she didn't help with dinner, or, you know, each session is very small, but they started to strike me as like a Japanese haiku, you know, where you're just observing like the cup of coffee, you know, but the whole world is revealed in the cup of coffee, you know, or the rock that's thrown in the pond, or the butterfly, you know. So I started to see the Zen in each session. And then, I know I'm going on too long, but
that's fine. Go ahead.
And I'm saying, I reached out to a friend, a guy named Jonathan Cott, who used to be a writer at Rolling Stone magazine, who I knew a lot about Zen poetry. And I said, can you tell me some books of Zen poetry? I'm working on this thing, and there's a lot, I think that's, you know, reminding me of a lot of Zen, but I don't know that much. And he gave me a whole list of like 7 or 8 compilations of Zen poets, which I have documented in the book.
Yeah.
And the Zen poems started to come alive for me during the writing. Like I could see, I never really understood them before, but I could see, I would read one and it would be sort of like what the therapy session was like, you know. So I began to incorporate them into the reflections. So I really had a good time with the writing. And I brought in all my, Freud and Winnicott and Ram Dass and Adam Phillips, who's a big psychoanalytic writer I admire. So I was weaving together this tapestry in my mind, trying to show how Buddhism could influence or elevate or accent or season what it means to be a psychotherapist. And, whether I think I sort of succeeded in showing how I work and how I think. And maybe that will be helpful or interesting, to other therapists or people interested in the mind.
Your book is precious. It's very nice. You have one of the cases of the patients. It's very interesting. It's about anxiety. It's about an actress with fear, I think, of the stage, or what's a big anxiety before acting. Can you tell us about this?
I have to remember which session it is. Tell me the name and I'll find it.
Yeah, let me see. I have a lot of.
You have some notes.
Another one.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. It's about anxiety. It's very nice. Talk about anxiety a little. I will find here.
I can talk about anxiety a lot. I'm an expert in anxiety. Anxiety and desire. Desire in the highest sense of desire, not desire as a problem, but desire as like an authentic reaching out into the world, from a true place. Anxiety and desire are like two sides of one coin. So anxiety is often the self interfering with itself, the self getting in its own way. And so the Buddhist approach to dealing with anxiety is to welcome it, to allow it, to not to attack it and not to retreat from it in that way I was talking about before. Not to cling, not to pull it towards you, not to push it away, but to simply breathe in the midst of the anxiety and to go forward towards whatever it is that you're trying to do. So that's an interesting exercise for people. So as a therapist, when someone is sitting with me and the anxiety starts to come into the foreground, I always know, we're on the right track. Like what I welcome the anxiety as the therapist, the way I have learned from doing my own meditation to work with anxiety. So the anxiety is usually a clue as to something that needs to be reflected upon, talked about, understood, etc.
I find here it's Violet.
Oh,
Violet. It's a young actress, drama actress.
I made her an actress. Yeah, that's why. Yeah. Well, let me find it, and maybe I can read a bit of it.
She's 29 years old.
There's a couple of cases of her.
Yes. Let me see what the part of she is here. Is after it's up after the quote of Shao Shu.
Uh-huh.
We have Jack. We have first Jack.
It starts the beginning of the book, because she comes back at the end.
It's in the middle maybe.
Uh-huh.
Because I have the Brazilian edition
Yeah,
here.
yeah. It goes in the same. I'll find it. Don't worry. Yeah, I'll read you a little of it, and then.
I'm sorry for this question.
You are? No, I love this question. Violet is a relatively new patient, a 29-year-old theater actor who reached out to me after several silent meditation retreats at the center where I also practice. I've met with her twice before, but I'm still getting to know her. I greet her warmly, but mispronounce her first name, calling her Violette. She corrects me, saying that happens often. People always make that mistake. Most times she doesn't say anything, but then it always bothers her. So she's trying to do the right thing, even though it's embarrassing to correct me. I apologize and say her name properly. She then tells me that she didn't think she performed well with me the previous week. Performed, I question her. She gives me some context as to why she used that word. An actor since junior high school, she graduated from one of the most prestigious drama schools in the country, has already worked with a number of cutting-edge directors, but she's thinking seriously of leaving acting. Acting has lost its sheen for her, and she recently experienced several episodes of intense performance anxiety before going on stage. Mm-hmm. A previous psychiatrist prescribed a beta blocker for her. It's a drug that blocks adrenaline, that used for stage fright. But she does not like to need drugs and assumes that her body is trying to tell her that it's time for a change. She's under intense pressure, however, from a close friend to continue a collaboration they've already begun, in which Violet would have to commit to another year of performing. So anyway, it goes on and on. But the way that she criticizes herself, is what, and I talk about it as the superego, using Freudian term, the superego. And she's actually one of the cases that does continue through the book. So a little more is revealed about her as the book progresses. But the main thing that's beginning to come out in this session is the perfectionistic quality that she applies to herself, that she learned from her parents, expecting a kind of perfection, which of course we can never achieve. And so anxiety is the result that becomes paralyzing, So anyway, that comes up in meditation also. People set these expectations for themselves of what they're supposed to experience in meditation or get out of meditation, or experience in psychotherapy and get out of psychotherapy. And then those expectations just serve to retard the process.
Mm-hmm. About the superego, you have a part, I think it's a quote of Adam Phillips. It's a kind of a comic aspect of the mind. They think the superego like a Sancho Panza, the Quixote. Can you explain this?
Well, it is from Adam Phillips talks about Freud. Freud, it's very interesting. It was interesting to me. Freud, as a teenager, was obsessed with Don Quixote. And he and his best friend, when he was like 16, 17, they learned Spanish. They read Don Quixote in the original Spanish. And Freud modeled his model of the mind. He used Don Quixote as the model, so that he said the ego is like the rider of the horse, like Don Quixote. The id is like the horse, and sometimes Adam Phillips quotes Freud as saying, sometimes the rider thinks he's in control, but really the horse is taking the rider where the horse wants to go. So that's the idea that the id or the impulses, we think we're in charge, but really we're at the mercy of our impulses. But then Adam Phillips said, so, okay, Don Quixote is the model. Where's the superego? And then he said, oh, the superego is actually Sancho Panza, who's like a fat clown, that's driving the whole thing. So to be able to see one's perfectionistic striving as nothing more than a kind of comic figure, is one of the aspirations of a good psychoanalysis, and also consistent with a Buddhist understanding. That's what I end up saying. And I use that patient Violet as an example of that.
I just love this idea of my superego like a clown. Because my superego is like a terrible guy, a terrible man.
Well, that's the inner violence. That's the inner violence. See, that's another way of talking about the inner peace and the inner violence that we all, if we believe Freud, we all have that aspect to our minds, that is driving us and critiquing us and trying to keep us in check. And we need some aspect of that, or we would just be like the horse going wherever it wants to go. But of course, it can become much too extreme and too dominant. So the ego. People often think that in Buddhism or in meditation, the idea is to get rid of the ego altogether, but I don't think that that's true. It's the ego that learns to meditate. It's the ego that learns to treat the superego as a comic figure. It's the ego that learns to control the horse, and it's the ego that ultimately sees through its own identity. It's the ego that ultimately realizes its own emptiness, but it doesn't mean that it goes away.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes, in my experience of meditation, I think the great challenge is to deal with the emptiness. You need to constantly live with this.
Well, people have a hard time understanding what that word signifies. The emptiness. They always imagine it as nothingness. As a big empty void. But I was really helped with that by learning that the word, the Sanskrit word shunyata, which is the word for emptiness, it comes from this idea of a seed expanding, so that it connotes a pregnant womb. So not an empty void, but a pregnant void. So it's a full emptiness, where that contains everything, including all the emotions, everything that's happening in our mind. We can see all of that with an understanding of emptiness, which means that it doesn't bother us. We don't get attached. We allow it all and learn how to move through it. And that's, in a way, the ego that's learning how to do that.
In your experience, how do you combine the meditation and the therapy? Do you use together the two things?
Well, I see the therapy as a meditation. So instead of meditation being only intra-psychic, within one person, I see the meditation as relational. So as happening between the two of us. So it's much easier for me to meditate with another person in the room, being a therapist, than it is for me to meditate just with myself. But I try to use what I've learned from meditating in myself for the other person. And then sometimes they can enter that space also, just by being open with themselves and open with me. Then they are in a meditative state also. And then it reverberates between us. And that's a very beautiful experience.
Mhm. Winnicott is a character very important in the book.
Yeah.
Can you explain for us the idea, the mind as a fiction, where we find a refuge?
Winnicott is very important to me, not just in this book, but certainly in this book. He's been a very important bridge for me in trying to talk about Buddhist thought in psychoanalytic language. And the main thing that I've gotten so much from Winnicott, but one of the main things that I've gotten from him is this idea of the holding environment as being so important. So Winnicott was a pediatrician, child doctor, a child psychiatrist, and also a psychoanalyst. So he was one of the first psychoanalysts to actually work with mothers, fathers, and children, not just to imagine what might have been going on when you were a baby, but he actually looked and observed. And what he saw was that the way that a parent relates to a baby, and in particular, the way they relate to a baby's emotions, to a baby's appetite, to a baby's anger, frustration, that the way that the parent holds those emotions of the baby, is very important. That there's a tendency, as we do with our own minds, for a parent to react with either anxiety or aversion or anger, frustration, or there's a way that a parent, a good enough parent, that's Winnicott's language, a good enough parent makes room for whatever is happening in the baby's experience. So that idea of the parent as a holding environment for the baby's emotion, Winnicott uses also to talk about what a therapist does for a patient. A therapist creates a similar kind of holding environment where whatever a patient is experiencing can be talked about, can be held, can be understood, can be related to. And I feel that mindfulness, the way it's taught in Buddhist practice, that what mindfulness is doing is creating a very similar, if not identical, holding environment for one's own mind. So that in a certain way, what we're doing is reparenting ourselves or repairing ourselves through the practice of meditation. So I think all of these different dimensions are actually very similar, and the language that I can use to talk about them, it can be the same. Within that, your question was about seeing the mind as a fiction.
Yes,
it's within the frame of that holding environment, where everything becomes part of the story. It's by creating that kind of space around it that you can start to see through the solidity of the way we understand ourselves or understand each other, the way we take ourselves too seriously. When because one of the things that a mother or a father does with a baby, when they're holding them in this good enough way, the baby is taking himself or herself very, very seriously. Like there is nothing else in the baby's, except I want you now. I want to eat. I'm unhappy. What does a parent do? A parent is like teases just enough. They're like they're like, it's, oh, what's wrong? Poor little baby. You must be hungry. You must be tired. I'll take care of you. It's okay. Like, look at that cute little butterfly over here. They distract. And so the baby starts to understand that emotional experience is tolerable, that it's not going to kill them, that even that their anger isn't going to kill the mother, So that's the fictional quality that I think you're starting to ask about, that parents they give naturally to their young children. In meditation, we're doing that for ourselves. Like we're sitting and meditating, and the anger comes up at whoever insulted us, at dinner time. And we're like, the natural tendency is to be like, I'm going to get back at that person, that how could they do that to me? But in meditation, we don't act on any of that. We're just observing, like, okay, fine, you're angry, like be angry, like see, where does it go? How do you feel it in your body? Like stay with it long enough, and what happens? Oh, it starts to go away, So the fictional quality, that's a good word of yours, I think. The lack of solidity, even to the strongest emotions, starts to dawn on the mind, and that's such a relief. That's a major revelation that I don't have to cut myself because I'm upset. I don't have to send that nasty email because I'm upset. I don't have to reach for the next drink because I'm feeling anxious. I can stay with my own experience longer without acting upon it. That's a major kind of understanding.
How can we use the aggression as a force for self-knowledge?
Well, I think aggression is a force for self-knowledge. It's just we tend to want to deploy it to destroy others instead of destroying our own misconceptions. So once we realize that it's sort of futile, that we're never going to win the battle against all the other people who aren't good enough to us, then the aggression, what are we going to do with that aggression? So we can start to, in the Buddhist sense of things, aggression becomes wisdom, because it has this quality of cutting through illusion. It's searching for the truth. It wants to, So the function of aggression is to overcome an obstacle. So what's the real obstacle? Like beyond this person who's not giving me everything that I need. What's the internal obstacle? It's my own conviction that I know what should happen next. It's my own sense that I'm right and that I need to be right. But so when you start to see that, oh yeah, what a tendency that is, and everybody has it, and so there's a billion people in the world, and they all need to be right, and is that, do I want to live like that? Then okay, I want to overcome that obstacle. So how can I wisely use my aggression to see through the fiction, of my own craving? How to do that? That's psychotherapy is useful for that. When you trust a therapist to show you where you're stuck, then in a way you can use your therapist's mind to help unstick yourself. Meditation also, when used in this way, can be very illuminating.
Dukkha is a very important Buddhist concept. Can you explain the meaning and how the therapy can help us to deal with this?
Well, the Buddha's main psychological teachings, were the Four Noble Truths. So that's his explanation of where our suffering comes from, where our unhappiness comes from, and how to get out of it. So the first noble truth is one word, and it's dukkha. So, and that's the truth of, it's usually translated as suffering, but a better understanding of what he's saying is that there's a sense of unsatisfactoriness that pervades our experience, even though there's so much pleasant experience that's possible. He's not denying pleasure, but he's saying that even pleasure leaves, it's never quite enough. It always leaves a shadow of, it's over, or if it was a little bit more this or that. So there's a quality to life, the Buddha is saying, that has this unsatisfactoriness to it. And the word he uses is dukkha. Again, if you take the word apart, dukkha, ka is face, and du means it's difficult. So there's another word, sukha, which is like sweet to face, which is like the sweetness of life, the taste of sugar, the smell of the flower, the feeling in sex, and so on. Sukha, happiness, pleasure. But dukkha, there's an aspect to life that's hard to face, the Buddha says. And our tendency is to turn away. We would rather not face it. So most people go through life trying not to face the aspect of things that's hard to face. And the Buddha lists all these things: old age, illness, death, separation, loss, being too close to people that you don't like, being separated, being too distant from the people that you do like. It's a good list. As the Buddha goes on in his teachings, he says, okay, there's dukkha. Then the second noble truth is the cause that is this not wanting to face this thing that is everywhere, And then he says, but there's the possibility of relief from this, which is nirvana. And then he lays out the path, which is basically learning how to face that which you don't want to face. And that's why meditation and therapy, don't have to be seen as separate things. They can work together. They can empower each other. They can help each other to help us, not turn away, but be able to surf even that which is unsatisfactory without it taking us down.
In the beginning of the book, we wrote about the childhood of Buddha. In a memory, he was a child and observed his father working. The importance of this memory for him. Can you explain for us?
Yeah. Well, the Buddha, when he was working very hard to try to free his mind from all the pain within, for several years, he embraced the spiritual practices that were dominant in his day, which were ascetic practices, self-punishing practices, eating only very little bit, dressing in rags, meditating all day long, basically trying to free himself from all kinds of desire, even from the confines of his body. And he did these ascetic practices, beating himself, the whole thing, that are present in many religious traditions, in fact. And at a certain point, and when you read the texts, they're very lurid in their descriptions of how emaciated he was. He's drinking his own urine. He's falling over on himself. He can hardly stand up. At a certain point, he has this memory. And the memory is of being like a young boy, 9 years old or so, sitting under a rose apple tree, watching his father plow in the fields. And it's a beautiful day, and the wind is blowing, and the sun is shining, and he's under the shade of the rose apple tree, and he's happy, And I think this memory is like I talk about it as the first successful self-analysis. The Buddha, it stops him in his tracks. And he's like, why am I having this memory now? Where is this coming from? It's like coming into therapy with a dream. Like, what is this dream? What does it mean? And he reflects upon it. Like, why? And he says, maybe this whole approach that I've undertaken, this way that I'm seeking liberation, maybe I'm going about it the wrong way. Maybe this memory is showing me something. There's something in this feeling of the young boy happy under the rose apple tree, that is a key to the path that I should be on. And he says, but with a body this emaciated, like starving like this, there's no way I could ever sustain that kind of pleasant feeling that I remember. So he says, I'd better take some food. I'd better find some nourishment. And at that moment, according to the story, a young woman from the neighboring village appears. And she's holding a bowl of like rice pudding, rice porridge. And she was actually coming to leave the bowl of porridge for a deity, for a spirit, a tree spirit that she believed had helped her get pregnant. Because she hadn't been able to get pregnant. She had left this offering a year before under the tree, and that she'd had a baby, and she was coming back to give the tree spirit thanks, And instead of that, she sees the Buddha there, this like weird, naked, emaciated, matted haired, sadhu, ascetic, and she thinks, oh, that's the tree spirit, And so she offers him the food just as he's had this revelation. And he takes the food, drinks the food, and it sustains him, according to the story, for 49 days, which is a magic number, And then he walks on and ends up under the famous Bodhi tree, where he sits for 3 days and finally gets enlightened. But that memory is said to be the beginning of the Buddha's middle path. So the middle path is the path between ascetic self-denial and sensory indulgence. So it's not pushing away the pleasantness of the world, and it's not attaching oneself to the unpleasantness. It's moving between the two. So it's very important. That's a real Buddhist, something very special about Buddhism. And I use that story in this book of the young woman, Sujata, coming with the nourishment. I use that also as a metaphor for what psychotherapy can be, a kind of spiritual friendship, where the therapist doesn't really know who the patient is. The young woman didn't know that the Buddha was going to be a Buddha, thought he was somebody else. So the therapist doesn't really know. The patient comes, who is it? We don't know who you are. But what do I have to offer? I have this way of looking at things to offer, this way of relating to offer. That's the, if there's any nourishment there, that's what I or any therapist has to offer. And if a person drinks of it, then maybe they can become who they're meant to be.
Mark Epstein, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your book is precious. It opens windows to other books, to other writers. It was really, really pleasure for me to read that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking the time with me.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this wonderful talk and for bringing such interesting topics for us to reflect upon. Thank you, Mark. Thank you enough. Yes, I want to do a print screen for us with the book. And thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your experiences, both in the book and during this talk, this interview. Thank you, Zé, for your time, for being such a lovely host. And Mark, just a second, I'm going to switch to Portuguese for our final messages.
Please. Yeah.
So, obrigada a todo mundo que nos acompanhou até aqui. Na descrição do vídeo, a gente vai deixar o link para a página do livro no site e também o link para baixar um trecho do livro. Assim vocês vão poder comprovar o que o Zé e a gente trata. O livro é uma leitura essencial para abrir a nossa mente, para expandir o nosso autoconhecimento. Se vocês gostaram, deem um like aqui no vídeo, podem compartilhar por aí e se inscrevam no canal. Em breve a gente traz mais novidades para vocês. Once again, thank you, Mark, and hope we have other opportunities to talk.
I know, I hope so too.
Yeah. And obrigada de novo, Zé. Foi ótimo, obrigada. Tchau, gente, até a próxima.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Mark. Thank you very
Let's
much.
show the book. Let's all show the book, Mark. With the book. Great. Thank you. Obrigada, gente. Até a próxima.
Bye-bye. Thank you.